Hello, everyone. Good morning. Welcome. We're waiting on some folks to finish joining in. We're excited to have you with us here this morning. I'm Jamie Fisher, the Director of Instructional Technology at Carroll, and we'll get started here in just another minute. Welcome, folks. As folks are logging in, we are excited to see you this morning. Thanks for being here with us. We'll get started in just a couple minutes as everyone gets logged in. And today we're going to be using the Q&A feature if you have any questions. So take a look at the bottom of your screen. You should see an option for Q&A. If you have any questions along the presentation, throughout the presentation, put them right into that box and we will get to those in your next meetings. But please do use them. We love to get questions throughout the presentation. All right. Welcome, everyone. We are getting close to our total number, so I think we're going to go ahead and kick off. We're so excited to have you here today. I am Jamie Fisher, the Director of Instructional Technology at Carroll. Welcome this morning. We're so glad to have you join us on Zoom. Before we get too far, I wanted to let you all know that this is being recorded. So if you want to share this with someone who couldn't be here today, please let us know. We are happy to send out the recording to you after it's processed. Additionally, we'll be using the Q&A, which is at the bottom of the screen. You can look for the kind of two chat bubbles. And if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please put them here. We will make sure to address those in our follow-up meetings. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Stacy Daniels, who will give us an overview of the morning.
Jamie, thanks so much. Good morning. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us at Virtual Carroll School. I'm just going to give you a quick overview of the morning. I'm joined here this morning with several of my colleagues, Osa Osage, Sue Kingman, and soon Allison West will be joining us. They are division heads, Sue and Allison, and Osa Osage is our Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And this morning, what we'll do is we'll spend some time together, about 45, 50 minutes in this large session where you can see us, but we can't see you. And we will be, as Jamie said, presenting to you. Please use the Q&A button. And again, when we go to these next sessions, which I'll describe in a moment, we're going to address your questions there. So from here, just sit tight, take a listen. There's a lot of details. We don't expect you to take it all in. We're just trying to give you a sense of our school in the most powerful way possible in the remote format. Many of you have already registered for your next meeting. If you are, for example, you have a rising fourth grader, so your child is going into fourth grade next year, you would have registered, or you can still register for this next small meeting that will happen. So we're going to have a group for our first through third graders, fourth and fifth graders, a separate one for sixth, a separate one for seventh. And for those of you looking at our upper school program, there'll be one for you there as well. Jamie's going to go ahead and once we get started, put those links in the chat, just in case you need to still register for those. It's not a problem. We will plan to kick those off at 10:30 and have a hard stop at 11 o'clock. During those meetings, you're welcome to keep cameras on, your microphones on. We view that as much more interactive time to facilitate questions and have a real conversation. So without further ado, let's get started. Let me tell you why Carroll School is such a special place and how we give every child what they most need. I thought it would be important to help you get a sense of our school to ground you in our mission. And I'm going to go ahead and read it out. Carroll School empowers children with language-based learning differences, such as dyslexia, to become academically skilled students who are strong self-advocates and confident lifelong learners. Carroll is an inclusive community committed to embracing diverse strengths, identities, and lived experiences in order to give each child what they most need to thrive. And I would say we have always been a school that has focused quite tightly on educating dyslexic learners. And I use that word dyslexia as shorthand for language-based learning challenges or specific learning disability. And I'm going to go ahead and do that throughout the presentation, as we might do in our smaller meetings. But please know that that encompasses many of those diagnoses. We are also a school that is very much focused on knowing our children, their lived experiences, their heritage, their identities, knowing them for their whole selves. It is critical to us. So let's get started in helping me to explain to you why Carroll gives every child what they most need. So I think it's important for us to understand, how do we do this? We do this by focusing on a very specific profile, and I'm going to take you through that in this presentation. It is the work we do in admission to help us understand if we have what your child needs. We also do really carefully homogeneous groupings. I have some great visuals to help you explain our model. I'm going to talk to the brain-based interventions, a partnership that we have with MIT and around research. And then I'm going to pass it off to Allison West, our division head for the middle school, who's going to talk about data-informed progress monitoring. Osa is going to then join in to talk about faculty expertise and expectations. And finally, Sue Kingman will finish us off talking about the vibrant community and the school culture of Carroll. So looking ahead, let's spend some time talking about why this school works. And this school works, going to the next slide, because we give each child what they most need. It is what we focus on every single day. It is how we train our teachers. It is how we think about groupings. It is how critically we monitor progress and how committed we are. So you might be asking yourselves, how can we do this? And many of you have been in educational systems that have made promises to you with good intentions. Educators, people go into teaching because they love children, they care about children, they want to teach. But not every institution is equipped as we are to focus on this one type of learner. It's complex, it's a lot of work, and it is our specialty. So, not to toot our own horn, but after 54 years, we are experts at teaching to this type of learner, all 442 students. We have spent many, many years honing and refining. And we talked to this, which is that we have 442 learners who have these very tight profiles, but 442 versions of this same learner, and we give each one of them our best. So let's talk a little bit about who is this learner. And I'm going to, from the outset, say, this is generally. I'm going to describe a profile. It is kind of what I would say is sort of the mean of where we are. But we also have diversity around many of these metrics. And I'll try and describe a little bit of those. But that is to say, if you don't hear sort of, oh, this is my child, it still may be that we may be the right school. And I'll also try and describe some of the other diagnoses that we aren't so skilled at supporting. I also invite you to, after I describe all of this and at the end of this presentation, if you have questions, we are open in admission. If you want to send us an evaluation, if you want to send us an email, for us to kind of take a look before you actually apply. So let's take a look at the profile for a minute. For many of you, you have a psychoeducational evaluation from your school system, or you have a private neuropsychological eval. In many of those, there's a test called the WISC, which is a IQ test, a traditional IQ test that looks at the cognitive profile of your child. I'm going to talk to the WISC, though there are others, just because it's most common what we see. We like to look at testing that is no older than 18 months. Sometimes if it's just under 2 years, it's really relevant. Our kids are so young, things change pretty often, and it is very important for us to look at current information. So in this WISC, there's 5 domains, and there's several of these that really define our kids and others in which there are variability. So our students tend to have high verbal comprehension indexes. And what is that? So that is your child's sort of well-developed vocabulary or their ability to draw verbal analogies. And parents often wonder, why is it that my child has such strength in their verbal comprehension when they have an LBLD, a language-based learning challenge? They have dyslexia, they have a specific learning disability. Why is that? Our students tend to be really great with language. They're intelligent students who have, in many cases have really nice vocabularies or are able to do that verbal analogy piece. What the verbal comprehension index represents is the ability to problem solve using words. Another hallmark of our student is a strong fluid reasoning. And fluid reasoning tends to map very closely with math. It's your students do some visual algebra and they complete a matrix figuring a shape. And as the verbal comprehension test shows, it's a problem solving indicator. This is the solve the problem without the words. What we also see in our students, kind of dropping down a little bit to this weaker working memory and processing speed that you see on the slide, is while the top two domains, the verbal comprehension and the fluid reasoning, tend to generally be stronger in our students, the working memory and the processing speed tend to be areas of vulnerability. And many of our students have one or both of these weaknesses. So let's talk a little bit about what these look like. The working memory is a very incredibly short-term holding space in the brain. It plays out quite prominently in reading, and where we see it most often is a student will go to sound out a word, right? And a classic word, let's just go with cat. And they would say k, a, t. And by the time they got to the t, and I'm picking a very simple word, I mean, I could pick a multisyllabic word, but by the time they got to that last sound, the t, they will have forgotten perhaps the k. And so it's very frustrating for these really intelligent students who have these verbal comprehension indexes, these great problem skills, to have this deficit. It's very frustrating, and it makes reading complex. It undermines their fluency and their automaticity. What they also have at times is something called a slow processing speed. Processing speed is our ability to kind of quickly and efficiently churn information through our brain. So many people describe it as the wait, what moment. And often the case for our students who've been in other educational environments is they're the student who a teacher may ask a question, everyone throws up their hand, and our students are sitting there, okay, wait, I can get this. I know this. It just takes a little extra time. But the way that they think about this is, I'm stupid. I couldn't get it. Everyone is faster than me. And they can get it. They do know it. It just takes a little extra time. So finally, this fifth domain of the cognitive profile is the visual spatial. And this is a real area of variability in our students. What we notice is that some students have real strengths, and in some cases, this is their highest score on their whole cognitive profile. And for others, this is an area of weakness. This visual spatial is much like the kind of Legos and block designs and puzzles, those things that we grew up with. A lot of these sort of visual manipulations. Most often it's sort of future architects or engineers who possess a really strong skill in this way. So this describes the cognitive profile of our students. And again, I'm going to go with generally, right? Generally. What we also see in our students is a history of phonological struggles. So while they may not carry this diagnosis, what we can see is that they may have, for middle school example, remediated themselves out with some good OG tutoring or Wilson tutoring, or they may have some compensatory strategies that they're so bright and they've gotten by for a very long time, but have some real holes in their foundational skills. What we also love to see when we're reading as an admission committee here, and there's a large number of us who participate in this, is the notable strengths. And I'll talk to kind of a whole series of dyslexic advantages a little later in this presentation. But for many of our students, they have something that makes them shine. They have something that makes them just a little special, these dyslexic talents. But we're always at our core, we are a school for students who have language-based learning difficulties. Some of the other diagnoses I'll just talk briefly about is for 40 to 60% of our students, they have some attentional challenges. We see that whether diagnosed or not. And for us, we can support this as a sort of secondary diagnosis to the dyslexia, right? It is not the primary, it is something that rides a bit sidecar with that. Some of the other things we see at times is a very mild generalized anxiety disorder. I think the pandemic has not necessarily been a friend to social emotional health in any of our kids. And I think it's important for us to just take a moment here to talk about some things that we aren't so skilled at remediating and addressing in the context of our program. And that would be if your child's primary diagnosis was ADHD, they had some behavioral challenges, they fall on the autism spectrum somewhere, we are likely not the right school for your child in that instance. However, in admission, like I said, we're always happy to be looking at some testing and to help provide some resources or point you in the right direction if possible. just looking ahead a little bit, we thought it would be great to give you a sort of macro overview of the school and what we look like in terms of size and shape and ratios. So in our lower school, what you'll notice is that we start really, really small with just 18 students this year in our first and second grade. And then as we get to third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade, we sort of balloon out, right? By third grade, a lot of people have been let in on the secret that their child has a language-based learning challenge. And we see that number grow by fourth grade, and we see that number really grow by fifth grade. Just to say, every grade in the lower school is a point of entry. So it's never too late to apply to Carroll in the lower school. In the middle school, what we'll see is we go just a bit bigger. We add, about 16 students in sixth grade, jumping up from fifth grade. Our seventh grade is a little bigger this year, eighth grade a little bigger this year. We tend to be about 80 students across the 3 grades. The one thing I will say is we do not, unfortunately, take new students in seventh grade. It is a place that we wish we could rethink about, but at this time we cannot. If students leave by attrition, we're able to add. And for those students who are thinking about 8th grade, the upper school, we have a very small program that's on our Wayland campus, and that is where we are able to take new 8th and 9th graders. It is an intentionally small program. We do have a small cohort of kids who go from our Lincoln 8th grade over to our 9th grade. I think what's also important to notice here about this slide, as I've kind of taken you the overview of the 442 students, is that for these 442 students, we have 156 educators, which puts us at a ratio of about 3 to 1. It is part of what makes us special is the expertise of these teachers and the idea that we really know our kids and can teach to them in small classes. I'm going to spend a few slides kind of taking you through a model to help you understand what that looks like. So I just want to sidestep for a moment to talk about summer at Carroll. For many families, they will test drive Carroll by doing the Summer at Carroll program. It is a sort of morning of academics with an afternoon traditional summer camp. I will say, unfortunately, at this time, we are at wait list for every grade for summer at Carroll. But again, sort of please be in touch with us. We can kind of talk you through our wait list or talk to you about the academic year. But as this slide shows, kind of 40% of our families have attended summer at Carroll at some point or another. It is uncommon, I'll say, for families once at Carroll to do the summer at Carroll program. We kind of find that it's enough Carroll during the year, and it's nice to have sort of a typical summer once you get there. So let's talk a little bit about how we give every child what they most need. I'm going to take you through the carefully configured groupings. I've got some really nice visuals that help explain this. So this might be where your child's in school, a traditional school model. And what you can see here on the left of your screen is a bunch of people in orange and some blue students. Those blue students represent our kids, those students who struggle to acquire language, those students who are incredibly bright and wonderful problem solvers. They are these sort of bright, motivated students who struggle in the area of language. And what we do here is, as you can see in a general ed classroom, right, we might take these 48 students and they might get divided into 2 classrooms, and you can see our blue students are sort of peppered through there. And just going through to the next slide, what we do here at Carroll, which this blue people illustration shows, is we teach to this one type of learner, right? We take these intellectual students, we separate them out. I think in many traditional environments, a teacher can only teach to the mean, they can only teach to the middle. So those students who sort of fall at one end or the other end up in some sort of pullout or enrichment of one kind or another. And we know from our students here, the least favorite part of the day, the most humiliating part of the day often is going to these pullouts, that going to the special room with the teacher. And as effective or efficient as that may be, there's often other students with various profiles working in that group as well. So that educator is also just trying to teach to sort of a center point in this group. And what we're able to do at Carroll is to just take this very specific profile, this thing that we do, that one profile that we have 442 versions of. And we are able to really take a look at all of these blue people. And this is what we do in admission. This is what we do when students are enrolled, but really dig in and learn all we can. So I've got this nice graphic here that shows all of these blue people, and then I can do some shading to show you how we understand that there are variations among this and how these variations, these gradations are critically important for us to understand. Here at Carroll, we are, as I've said, incredibly effective at educating this one type of learner. We're very, very efficient at it. We do this by creating these micro-segmented groupings. So I'm just going to jump to the next slide to try and show you how we kind of group out our students. So here are those 48 students that we sort of took from that first orange and blue people model. And as you can see, I've got some various colors. And this is what it might look like when Sue Kingman and Iram Hawk, the head of our language program here at the lower school, divide out, let's call them fourth graders. Let's divide out these fourth graders into language groupings, right? And as you can see, we are able, because we teach to this one profile, to create really homogeneous groupings, right? We can look at this, we can understand everything that you give us in admission, and thank you, the neuropsychological testing, the evaluations, the report cards, the teacher feedback, your parent statement. We read everything that you give us because it is critically important to helping us understand, again, whether we have what your child needs, and to make sure that we understand the differences within the profile to create these groupings. The other thing that we know, however, and I'm sorry, apologies here. One thing I just thought would be useful, thank you, Kristen, if you want to pop that up, is just to give you a sense, I have this fourth grade model going on here at the bottom of the slide, is that this year in our 76 sixth graders, we have 9 different language classes. So you can kind of get a sense of the size of these classes and how that might really be different from where your child's currently in school. What we also know, however, is that these groupings, while they work very well for language, are probably not the same for your child's math profile, right? So I'm taking these language groupings, right? And then I have to really dig in and understand. And for many of our students, math is an area of strength. And for others, it's the attention, the executive function, some of the fluency pieces and the working memory that make math really challenging as well. So we divide these groups into really small math classes in some cases. And as you can see here, and other groupings that look very much like our language classes. And this is going back to this theme that we have. This is how we give every child what they most need. We really dig in, we micro segment around skills. And I think it's important here to talk for a minute about how this segmentation is not about ability, it is about skills. There's no leveling at this school. There's no pullout. Everyone is going to the same class at the same time. So just looking ahead a little bit, sorry, I've done this yet again, Kristen, thank you for that. Again, I'm working off my fourth grade model here, but looking at a sixth grade example, we have 9 sections of math. So just to give you a sense of how this might play out in the middle school. And for those of you thinking about the upper school, it's very, very similar in that small program. All of our sort of ratios and groups, very, very similar. So another area I'd like to talk about is our focus area. This is where we dig in and go even more granular. So I'm just going to take these 48 students and I'm going to divide them into this realm of giving each child what they most need. What is their area of greatest need? So Kristen, I'm just going to ask you to do that animation. Wonderful. And for some of our students, and again, we're working off this fourth grade model just to be able to generalize, what they need is a one-on-one tutorial. But as students become more able to generalize, and for many of our youngest students and our middle school students, 4th and 5th graders, they need to be in paired tutorials or in these smaller focus areas. They do better in these groups with a similar partner, similar small cohort. These students on the far left, they may be working very much at the beginnings of decoding. They may really need that one-on-one. As students progress and they move towards comprehension, fluency, writing, they move into these paired and these focus areas as their skills evolve over time. And for some of those students who come to us in 4th and 5th grade and middle school, the decoding is less of a problem. They are more in the comprehension or fluency pieces around the automaticity, the executive function, and the writing. So a final part of this Blue People model that I'd like to talk about is advisory. And this is something that has three components. It has a social component, it has a skills component, and it has a parent liaison portion to it that are all merit us talking about. From the skills perspective, we divide kids into their advisories and they meet with their advisor twice a day, sort of set their intentions for the day, go over some goal setting, some executive function. Do I have my materials? What do I need? Doing some previewing, helping students to sort of encode some of these routines to help them become more efficient and better at executive function within themselves, to help them ground themselves for the day. And many of our students who graduate from Carroll still find that they do these routines. They've embedded them. And so they'll check in the morning. In the middle school, we have something called NCLU, in the lower school as well. No child left unorganized. Parents often tell us this is their favorite part of the day. So they are breaking into these. And the other parts that I've sort of talked about aside from the skills is the social component. Nice to see this group of kids that they know every morning and every afternoon. And finally, this advisor will serve as the parent liaison to communicate primarily with families around anything that's needed. We have 4 conferences a year and we have report cards, but the conferences will include all of the adults who educate your child, with the advisor as the sort of primary contact. So just going ahead a little bit, I've now sort of talked to our profile. I've taken you through this elaborate Blue People model, helped you to understand how we do groupings. And I'd like to just step back for a little bit and get a bird's eye view on the design of the program. So I talked a little bit about these dyslexic strengths, which I'll get to in a moment, but just as an overview, we spend about 62% of the day on the remediative pieces, right? So we have these structured language classes that I told you about in the focus area, in the language classes. And then we have that focus area that I also talked to, and then finally the small group math, right? A lot of the things that I illustrated in the Blue People. And what we know from being here at Carroll and from our jobs or our lives is there's only so long that we can spend doing things that are very, very hard for us, right? And for some, for many of our students, they feel quite affirmed by the remediative pieces. They make progress. They are really tight with their educators. They really enjoy being with their peers. But a lot of this work is really, really hard. It takes a lot of resilience. It takes a lot of tenacity. It takes a lot of effort. It's really, really hard. I don't know if many of you have sort of thought about what it takes to read. And for some people, it comes really automatically. But when you break it down, it's actually very, very hard. On the other side of this, I wanted to speak to the balance of our program, which really looks at the dyslexic strengths. So we've got a nice list up there, which shows that they really often flourish in the design, the social justice, the history, the science, the arts, the bounders, the leadership, and the service. And that is a big part of our program because we feel it's not only important to remediate kids, but to help them feel good about what they're already good at. It's critically, critically important. One of the things that our graduates tell us is that they leave with confidence, right? This was part of our mission. They feel able to self-advocate. They know themselves as learners and they feel good about themselves as learners. So another part of the program that I'd like to describe is how we go beyond the academics, right? Much of what I have described here is about cognitive profile and the academics and how we do this. But in that cognitive profile, I talked a little bit about working memory in the context of advisory. I talked about executive function. So I'd like to take a moment to talk about how we go even deeper and delve into the underpinnings of why our kids struggle. And what I'm going to do on this next slide is these are the areas that our Cognitive at Carroll program addresses. Our youngest learners, grades 1 through 3, participate in a foundational cognitive program that's embedded in their program into every single class, while our older students do a computer-based intervention that looks at various domains. And we're just going to play a 4-minute video that really help you to understand the Cognitive at Carroll program before I turn it over to Allison West.
What is targeted cognitive intervention? Bright, motivated students come to Carroll School with language-specific learning challenges such as dyslexia. These children share a similar learning profile. They struggle to read. But when we look closer, we've uncovered that there are underlying cognitive differences. Many of these students have weaknesses in one or more cognitive capacity, how their brains process, organize, and use information. Take the word bat. You probably just read that on the screen. Simple, right? But when we look at brain activity while reading bat, you get a different perspective. Brain scans reveal so much going on. This is the reading network. It links visual recognition, auditory language, and executive function areas. Not only are these regions themselves crucial, but efficient communication among them is essential for one's ability to read. Think of it as a set of roads connecting important landmarks in the brain. When the road is narrow and full of potholes or backed up with traffic, it takes longer to get from point A to point B. When neural pathways are weak or underdeveloped, the brain's capacity to benefit from instruction is diminished. Armed with this data, we set out to find a way to optimize these cognitive capacities, to pave the roads and turn those pathways into superhighways. What was our solution? Targeted cognitive intervention. Remember our bright students with dyslexia? Their brains work incredibly hard to learn. We asked, what if we could drive faster communication between different brain regions to develop a stronger, more efficient reading network? Partnering with scientists, doctors, cognitive specialists, computer geniuses, and inspired teachers, we developed a training program to do just that, targeted cognitive intervention. TCI is a data-informed educational practice designed to strengthen the reading network in the brain. It includes computer-based assessments and games, regular progress monitoring, and teacher coaching tailored to help students build a cognitive toolbox that they can carry with them throughout their lives. TCI is built to work within a school environment alongside other academic classes. So how does TCI work? Prior to training, each student is given a pre-assessment to measure cognitive functions. Our software crunches the data and we create a cognitive profile for that student. The student is then assigned to a program based on their area of greatest need. In a classroom with a teacher, the student works on a set of activities that targets his or her specific cognitive weakness. Throughout the program, the software helps teachers monitor progress and provide individualized coaching to ensure that the child stays on track. At the end of each round of TCI, a post-test is given to determine which areas have improved. Reports are accessed through the platform by teachers who can use the data in different ways to understand and support each child's unique profile. Maybe you're wondering what results we're seeing. We're so glad you asked. In addition to helping us understand individual profiles, the TCI platform allows us to study data on a group level in order to discover exciting, large-scale trends and patterns among our population. One of the things we found is that improvements in reaction time are most strongly associated with word identification, which in turn is a major predictor of oral reading fluency, a child's ability to read a passage out loud. When we combine TCI training with Carroll's highly individualized reading curriculum, the results are astounding, even to cognitive scientists. Students are moving across percentile bands in oral reading fluency, a feat that many say is not possible. Why is this important? The ability to read fluently is crucial for academic success. Most exciting for us, as a school for children who struggle with dyslexia, is that we are significantly closing the achievement gap for our students.
Great. Thank you so much. I hope that's helped you to understand a little bit more about our TCI program. And as I said, we're always available to answer questions in the breakout room or through our admissions at Carroll email. So right now I'm going to pass it over to Allison West. And one thing I just want to say quickly, and I'll repeat this at the end, we're having a little trouble with our registration link for the 1st through 3rd grade. So if those folks can just stay on this call, we'll make sure to get you set up. Thank you so much, Allison West.
Thank you, Stacy. Good morning, everyone, and I'm really happy to be here with you all today. As you just heard from Stacy, she was able to describe a lot of the ways in which we teach to a really specific profile of student. And although we have 442 unique versions of that profile, we truly do strive to give each of those individuals exactly what they need. So have you heard that before? We give each child what they most need. And you're probably going to hear it a few more times as we progress through the rest of our presentation here. So I'm going to share a little bit about how we do this by collecting data that helps us track academic growth, along with data that helps us really understand and define a student's cognitive profile or how they learn best. And by doing this, we can then design an academic program that really capitalizes on each of the students' strengths. And you heard Stacy talk about the dyslexic strengths, while also continuing to target instruction that's building those lagging skills. So I would like to introduce you here to Binny. He is now a graduate. I had the pleasure of teaching him in 7th grade. And here we see Binny in 3rd grade. And to orient you to this chart a little bit, please know that as this blob grows out towards the outside of the web, this represents growth in the skills. And the skills are outlined along the perimeter of the circle here. Each line of that web represents a percentile line. So the closer we get to the center, that's the 10th percentile nationally. And as we go out, that represents growth, as I said. And all of these words that are around the perimeter, as I mentioned, those represent the assessment tools that we use to collect the academic and the cognitive data. So for example, at the very top, if we're looking at 12 o'clock, as though this is a clock, you can see here that for Binny, elision, which is a phonological processing task, was significantly underdeveloped for him in the 3rd grade. That's really close to the center of the blob. It's actually below the 10th percentile. Whereas segmenting sounds, which is right to the right of elision, falls within the average range. So this shows to us uneven development in the phonological processing skills that we know are required for that targeted individualized instruction. Now, the same is true for both word attack and word ID. So we can see at about 6 o'clock, reading fluency also presents as a challenge, along with visual working memory and reading comprehension, which is likely a result of the decoding and the fluency challenges. However, if we look up at 11 o'clock, we can see that listening comprehension is actually a strength. As we move into 5th grade, we're going to see this blob for Binny grow. And we'll also see his picture grow here too. So we have 5th grade Binny here. And as we move into 5th grade, having had a really individualized program for 3rd and 4th, targeting those areas of need while also capitalizing on those strengths, we can see that he made some pretty significant growth as a result of that targeted instruction. Phonological processing skills, which are up at 12 o'clock and 1 o'clock, are now fully developed. And we can see steady growth in his word ID and word attack skills, which are at about 1 to 2 o'clock. Fluency, however, continues to remain an area of need. And we can see that clearly on the chart here at about, let's say 7 o'clock here. And that tells us that that continues to require that targeted instruction. Similarly, reading comprehension, although somewhat improved, continues to require that direct and explicit instruction as well. And then my word, we look at his executive functioning growth, which is right about 8 o'clock, and we see that he's developed really, really solid strategies for shifting attention between tasks. And he's developing a much more strategic approach as a student. Another impressive point of growth we can see here has to do with his visual working memory capacity. And we heard Stacy talk about the importance of working memory in the reading process. And so just as we're working to develop these academic skills, these discrete academic skills, we're always looking to improve the underlying cognitive process. And for Binny here, we can see that that visual working memory capacity has shown some nice growth. And that represents what we refer to as neuroplasticity. So we see that beautifully represented here. As we move on to seventh grade, our seventh grade Binny has continued to make progress. So with a really individualized program in fifth grade and sixth grade, we can see here that this blob, this spider chart, has continued to grow in pretty beautiful ways. There remains some variability throughout his academic and cognitive development, but our data shows that he's developed a really solid foundation. And even though there is this variability, many of these areas are at or above the 50th percentile, and therefore are falling within what we refer to as the average range nationally. Fluency, as you can see here at about 7 o'clock or so, remains a sort of persistent area of challenge for him. And so throughout his seventh and eighth grade, developing that fluency and automaticity really continued to be a targeted area of instruction throughout his focus area and flex block. So I hope that this combination of visual and my explanation give a little bit more clarity to how we truly do strive to give each child what they most need. And we do this by using our data to inspire our programming. So now I'm going to turn this over to my colleague, Osa, who is going to share some insight into the number one factor of student success.
Good morning, y'all. It's so nice to be here. So yes, the common theme for today is that you've probably picked up that Carroll strives to give each child what they most need in order to actualize their growth. And a question that you may have when you look at a child's development is, what exactly is the number one factor that contributes to a child's success? You may be thinking, is it motivation, possibly work ethic, maybe the impact of curriculum or a specific intervention? And while all of those are important and significant, years of research has found that the number one factor that surfaced as the single most influential component of student success is the impact of the teacher. And Carroll has a deep commitment to provide professional development that is not only rigorous, but 100% targeted towards helping our teachers work with our specific population of learners. So every Friday, students end their day at noon, and at that time, our educators become the students, and we take part in a lot of collaborative thinking and learning. So I'm just going to talk briefly about some of the different ways that Carroll provides these training opportunities for our faculty. And the first one that I will discuss is our approach to coaching. Every faculty member has a coach with whom they meet with on a regular basis, and coaches are there to provide support and feedback, discuss individual student action plans, analyze student data, develop curriculum, and so much more. Another really important part of our training is the opportunity to learn from experts in the field. These experts lead our community in workshops and help us enhance our pedagogy and grow as educators. In case you're wondering who we've had some visits from, we've heard from Marianne Wolf, Sarah Ward, and Kristen Jacobson, Rosetta Lee, Lynn Lyons, and Dr. Nadine Gabb. So it's really great to have outside voices come in and share their wisdom with our community in a collaborative way. We also utilize PLCs, which stand for Professional Learning Communities, and all of our faculty and staff are assigned to a PLC. These PLCs span across divisions and functions, and these groups meet regularly throughout the year to share their expertise, build community and culture, and collaborate and problem solve. Our focus this year and for the past 3 years for our PLCs have been on topics and issues surrounding diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. We're really also very fortunate to have a collaborative graduate program with Leslie University, whereby our graduate interns learn firsthand within our classrooms and alongside our teachers. And they also get to learn from some of our Carroll educators who teach them specific courses. And lastly, our school-wide theme this year is perspective taking. So our teachers and our staff routinely gather together within grades, departments, divisions, in order to unpack what perspective taking means and bridge meaningful connections to our students' curriculum, their social and emotional health and wellness, and aspects of their school experience. So at this time, I'm happy to turn it over to Sue Kingman, who is our lower school division head.
Thank you, Osa, and hello, everybody out there. I always love to wrap up our information sessions to talk a little bit about how we look at your child as a whole unit, as a human being. And you have heard so much in this presentation about how we take such high priority in training our teachers. And Osa just mapped all that out in all of our work that we do with teachers to get them as ready as they possibly can to educate our kids. And because we expect them to be very attuned to what students need in all domains of their learning, we expect them to be diagnostically understanding kids' strengths and weaknesses. We expect them to be building an educational experience that speaks to these characteristics. And that's where GEC comes in, and what you've heard around giving each child what they need most really comes into play. So we call all of the learning profile information that we have on each child and all of the lived experiences that we know about each child, and we build a plan for their specific program. And we group children in classes with this core information, and we program their focus areas and their tutorials and their flex blocks, all with this lens. So in fact, this GEC prescription for each child is the center of our thinking. And within GEC sits our steadfast commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. In order to fully GEC a child, we believe that we must provide an experience where all children of all backgrounds are seen and heard. And our program's core is driven by these priorities. So as we think about the impact of a child feeling a sense of belonging in their community, we talk about also how we also address a child's social and emotional and identity needs. We also believe that it's that sense of belonging that really helps to bring a real sense of security and a feeling of being understood to our kids that helps to make them thrive in our environment. And we go about creating this sense of connection at Carroll in both a purposeful and a natural way. Purposefully, we dedicate time in the beginning of the day in small morning meeting groups and advisory groups. And at the end of the day, these same groups come together and before they end their day. And we have something called we subscribe to the responsive classroom practices, which many schools do, but create these through the responsive classroom practices. We also create opportunities for kids to have input into their school culture, and what we really believe in. In a more natural way, kids feel a sense of belonging when they feel that their academic needs are being met and that other kids might learn as they do. And they may have similar lived experiences as they do, and that their teachers believe in them and are confident in what they can achieve. So as we look at a child holistically, as a whole child, is when we are focusing on that whole child, we consider all things that make a child, how they identify, both culturally, from a race perspective, gender, learning, and their individual strengths and weaknesses, their likes and dislikes, their social emotional needs. So we feel that knowing and serving all of these characteristics for each child really helps us to GEC our students more comprehensively. So in addition to the data that Allison shared with you, we look at all of the whole child considerations as well as we look at what a child might need. So as mentioned before, our teachers are taught to reach our students in this comprehensive way. And you noticed from the teacher training slide that our commitment to professional development is one of our concentrations in this training. Is really centered around preparing our teachers to reach children cognitively, emotionally, socially, physically, and in their identity development. And it's this comprehensive and integrated approach that helps to really mobilize our students to be more active and engaged learners. So in doing that, as we look at a child holistically and what other experiences they need in their school experience, I want to talk a little bit about how we also function as a complete school. So as we value the whole child approach and directly connect knowing a child in a more complete way, we will also want to be able to provide opportunity to nurture kids in ways beyond academics. And I want to illustrate how our program behaves both in a specialized way, which you've heard a lot about this morning, and also in a more normalized way that matches with programming they likely have currently in their school. Hence, we are a complete school, and that's how we engage them in a variety of ways. And here's how we do it. So we have multi-programming. So as all schools do, we have programming throughout their day in art, music, performing arts. We have something with an outdoor education program that's kind of unique to Carroll called Bounders. We obviously have physical education classes. We have makers classes for our kids grades 5 and up. So kids' unique sort of strengths in the arts and in music and performing arts and in athletically are all tapped throughout their day in that programming. We also have a very robust after school program. In the middle school, where we do interscholastic sports, about 85% of our students participated in our after school program. And it is there's sports opportunities as well as arts opportunities, performing arts opportunities, and studies support as well. We have Friday programming, as Osa described. Our teachers are in training on Friday afternoons, and they're collaborating on Friday afternoons. So every Friday afternoon, we have a whole array of options you could sign your child up for. Right now, in the winter months, they're skiing and tubing at Neshoba Valley nearby. They're going on hikes and apple picking and the like. We have a variety of clubs and affinity groups. We have a community service program on all campuses called Helping Hands. And we have school mottos, as many schools, and mascots and songs and belief systems that our kids are very much connected to. We have adjustment counselors on all campuses to support kids socially and emotionally and help with just general socialization hiccups and relationship hiccups and problem solving. We have something called Today's Raise this afternoon in the lower school. On Fridays, we are featuring what's happening in our multi-classes. And so we're having a multi-share where kids are showcasing some of their art or something they might have learned in PE or Bounders this afternoon. We have talent shows that kids participate in Today's Arrays. And these are ways that we connect as a whole community of a lower school and then a whole community of a middle and upper school. And we really share kind of our accomplishments. So these are just some of the examples of, how our program is designed and targeted to a dyslexic learner. And also how we behave like a typical program that supports children in their full selves. So I'm going to pass it to Stacy to kind of give you some logistics and to wrap it up. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. So some quick logistics, and I just want to clarify a few points. We are rolling admission. We are rolling for the next year. We are at waitlist for summer at Carroll, but if you have a combined application, that's already in the works if you've already submitted. But we are waitlisted for summer at Carroll. The rolling admission, again, is for the next year, not for the current school year. Another quick question that we got that I think merits mentioning at this point is about 22% of our students self-identify as people of color. So now I'm just going to do a quick kind of overview of the admission process and where we're going to go next in about 5 minutes. So you've attended one of our information sessions. You may have applied using Ravenna, our online portal. We have a link on our website to the application. We also have a link on the website to our financial aid application. I want to reiterate something critically important. We, while not need blind, we do not commingle an admission decision and a financial aid decision. It is myself and one other person on a very, very large committee of dozens of people who would review admission files who knows of financial aid. It is never a factor in an admission decision. We do recommend, however, that you apply for financial aid if you can concurrently with the admission. application. It is quite lengthy. It's through SSS. They do have wonderful customer care. And finally, what we're going to do next is we're going to go into separate meetings. As I said, there were links in the chat for all of these meetings. For those of you who are in the BR through 3, in other words, the 1st through 3rd grade, if you could stay on this call, and Jamie Fisher, who's helping us on some back-end tech, is just going to help us here. I see she's just put a new link to everyone in the chat. So maybe, Jamie, if that's the right thing, if everyone could just use that link, that should work. Do I have that right, Jamie?
We're struggling with that BR3 link. So if those folks can just stay on, I'll make sure that anyone who is not registered gets in.
Perfect. And so for everyone else, we're going to start those rooms at about 10:30. So grab a cup of water, use the restroom. And as I said, I've tried to pay attention to all the questions that you've put into the Q&A, but feel free to ask them again in case the person facilitating your room has not seen all of these. We really want to make sure. So I thank you so much for listening to all of this information. Happy Friday to you. And we are grateful that you spent this time with us. Have a wonderful weekend. Bye-bye.
All right. So for those of you who are looking, who have not yet registered for that first